First of all, a word of warning. This video contains heavy spoilers for the story of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I highly advise you to play through it yourself, not just for the sake of the story, but because the gameplay, character work, and oh my god, the soundtracks, they're all brushstrokes of jaw-dropping game design. If you finished the game, then I welcome you, as chances are that you're here because you're stuck in a depressive state of not being able to get enough of this masterpiece. I know it's been a long time since I felt so empty after finishing a game. So grab yourself a warm baguette, your mime outfit, and let's return to Lumière. Our story begins with two painters, Aline and Renoir. In this world, the ability to paint is special. It allows the painter to infuse a canvas with a part of their soul and draw entire worlds and beings into existence, but it also allows them to enter these canvases and interact with their creations. However, this gift comes with a price. Residing in a canvas for too long is dangerous for a painter. It weakens them and in time might even kill them. That is the danger of the worlds they paint. The canvas represents an intoxicating method of escapism, but the cruelty of it all is how deadly indulging in this escapism can be. At the time, Aline was a rather experienced painter, while Renoir did not yet know how to use his talents. In fact, when they met, he was stuck in a canvas, lost, and Aline found him and taught him how to use his power safely. They would end up getting married, painting thousands of worlds, and eventually having 3 children, Claire, Alicia, and Verso. The children of the Desandre family picked up the art of painting at an early age. As a young boy, Verso would create his first and only canvas, perhaps in part to train his skills as a painter, but also to make a realm he could escape into and have fun as a child. He painted Esquet and Monaco as his best friends and playmates. He created numerous places that are colorful and whimsical or make reference to the things he likes.
Yes, I still like trains.
And even made an entire race of silly beings based on those wooden mannequins that like every artist has in their studio. But he also gave them various styles of brushes for hair, made them have different shapes and sizes. Their appearance is very clearly a childlike homage to the painter's primary drawing tool. Verso's canvas became a world where he, as well as the rest of his siblings, would come to play. As time went on, however, as kids usually do, they outgrew their toys, and Verso's canvas was no exception. But, to the dismay of his parents, Verso did not actually enjoy painting, instead harboring a growing interest in becoming a musician. This much is confirmed by the fragment of Verso's soul that was used to paint the canvas, as it preserved his youth and memories. And so, his childhood canvas remained the only world he ever painted. There's not a lot that we know about the later parts of his life, or frankly even about the world itself, but what we do know is that the Desandre family held a leadership position in a guild of painters, and at that point in time they were involved in a conflict with another group, the Guild of Writers. Sometime later, this conflict escalated, and the writers attempted to murder the Desandre family by burning their house down.
You're okay.
Verso tragically passed away in that house fire attempting to save his sister Alicia. The Desandre family was broken by this loss. Alicia was left disfigured and unable to speak, her grief intensified by the effect of survivor's guilt, and that's on top of the fact that this may have been her fault, as it's implied that she was manipulated by the writers in some way. Aline is overtaken by grief, she neglects her duties to the guild, and distances herself from Renoir, who tries in vain to keep his family together. Lastly, we have Claire. While initially mourning over her brother with her family, she eventually grew disillusioned with her parents, as her grief manifested in a need for immediate vengeance, so she decides to go to war against the Writers' Guild. In time, presumably Renoir attempted to rebuild the manor, which is when he might have found something that shocked him. Aline rediscovered Verso's childhood canvas, and in her grief, she entered it. She was enamored with the intoxicating escapism the canvas represented, so much so that she outright ignored the warnings of prolonged existence in a canvas, her own teachings to Renoir. Instead, she decided to reside there, painting the city of Lumière as an imitation of Paris, right at the heart of Verso's painted world. She painted humans, gave them the ability to act, think, and feel much like any real human would, and finally, in her desperate attempts to make herself forget about what happened in the outside world, she recreated her own family. She painted Verso from her own memory, and her attachment in this recreation is so faithful that she didn't even change the fact that he would rather be a musician. She then painted her husband, Renoir, and made him in such a way that he would feel an unfaltering need to protect his family, perhaps in reflection to something she felt the real Renoir lacked, as it's very clear he tried his best to help her move on, an effort that she might have mistook for apathy. She also painted Claire and, of course, Alicia. Alicia is definitely one of the more interesting recreations. Rather than painting her as she was before the house fire, she left her disfigured. This is quite strange, because if the main point of her efforts were to forget and to live in a fantasy forever, leaving Alicia as she was after the house fire would make her a permanent reminder of what happened. This is where I theorize that Aline made a mistake when she painted Alicia. The only journal we can find written by Aline herself reveals that she feels a lot of resentment towards her daughter. Resentment that, by all means, she recognizes is wrong to feel, but otherwise cannot help, as some part of her does blame Alicia for what happened. We don't know for sure what the process of painting involves, but it is possible that when drawing Alicia, Aline let those negative emotions overcome her, and this was the result. Now, her painted family at some point must have learned about the truth, that they are recreations in a quote-unquote fake world. However, how that affected them, or when specifically they found out, we don't know. At any rate, Aline now had her family back, and their lives in the painted city of Lumière started to finally bring her some semblance of comfort. In the outside world, however, Renoir saw this for what it was: recklessness obfuscated by grief. He was certain that his wife, given the opportunity, would stay in the canvas forever, even if it meant that her physical body would die. Determined to save her, Renoir entered the painting. He tried to convince her to leave and let herself heal from this loss in the real world. But Aline would not let go. The canvas was too powerful, the presence of her son's soul too strong, and the prospect of having her family unbroken too comforting. And so they fought. Renoir was no match for Aline, as she was the more powerful painter, but he was prepared. He summoned immensely powerful creatures that would come to be known as axons, creatures that Renoir painted before, as we can find their portraits in his atelier in the outside world. Their fight would shatter the canvas. Around this time, several things happened, but the sequence in which they happened is a bit unclear, so I'll do my best to try and fill in the gaps. While Aline and Renoir and the Axons were fighting, they laid waste to the canvas, and Lumière was left in ruins. Their conflict ended in a stalemate. Renoir was able to seal Aline at the monolith, while Aline imprisoned Renoir below it, in the family mansion, as that's where we find him. I know this is a bit weird because we encounter the mansion in the ruins of Old Lumière, but we know that Aline can teleport it at will. During this time, the surviving people of Lumière, including the painted Renoir and Verso, took refuge in a distant island far away from all the chaos. Here is where they built a new Lumière, and eventually launched Expedition Zero, a search and rescue operation. Back then, the people weren't aware of the paintress and her importance, as Aline probably tried to blend in and adapt to her new life. Irrespective of that, we know of 3 people that would join Expedition Zero: Renoir, Verso, and a man called Simon. Their motivations for joining are rather clear. Renoir and Verso knew Aline needed help and wanted to reunite with the rest of the family, while Simon was in a relationship with Claire and wanted to find her. We do not know much of what happened to this expedition, other than the fact that at some point Simon disappeared without a trace. Let's leave them here for a moment as we return to the real Renoir. While still imprisoned in the manor, Renoir must have realized that he needed a change of tactics, since a direct approach was no longer possible. So instead, he used his skills as a painter to erase Aline's creations, thinking that once her changes are undone, the canvas would feel alien enough for her that she could be persuaded to leave. There is just one problem. You see, everything in a painted world, objects, places, even beings, they all have as a base component this thing called chroma. It's what a painter uses to paint things into existence, but this chroma is not infinite. Now, if you were to erase someone, the chroma that forms their being is released, and the painter who resides over the canvas could reuse it to paint something new. Basically, whoever controls the chroma controls the fate of the canvas. So, if Renoir were to erase Aline's creations, their chroma would go back to her and she could simply paint them back. Additionally, he couldn't just erase everything in one go, as Aline's power over the canvas prevented it. This was by all means a lose-lose situation for Renoir, all the while their physical bodies would continue to deteriorate in the real world. This is when Clair made her move and entered the canvas. Now, before we get into it, I think it's important to discuss Clair's character, because she's very different than the rest of the Descentre family. What's very clear from the small moment we meet her is that she is rather distant from her family. She's very detached from the conflict between her parents. Naturally, this could all be caused by how she processes grief differently, but I think it's implied that this distance grew long before Verso's death. If we look closely at the way she talks, we notice that she seldomly refers to them as her parents, or even more rarely refers to them affectionately as Maman and Papa. What happened for Clair to have this attitude towards them, we don't know, but it perfectly encapsulates her involvement in Verso's canvas. She does not want to get involved in their quarrel, but at the same time, she's not passive either. She recognizes that it's best for Renoir to succeed, but she's not gonna do that for him. Instead, she tips the scales towards his favor, so that eventually he may succeed while she gets back to her own work. I mean, we actually meet a fragment of her soul, and this fragment will not talk to anyone except Maëlle, who's not yet aware of her true identity as Alicia. And even then, she doesn't seem to care, not even about her sister still being stuck in the fake persona of Maëlle for quite some time within the canvas. Her main goal remains the same: vengeance in the real world. But the fact that a part of her soul is here makes it very clear that she did something. Remember, to paint is to use a fragment of your soul on a canvas. Indeed, we meet the soul of young Verso, who painted this world, but we also meet the soul of Renoir, because even though this isn't his canvas, he did paint the Axons to fight Aline, so it makes natural sense that we'd get to encounter Clair's soul too. In terms of what specifically she did, we know for a fact she did two things. The first is painting over Aline's Clair. We learn that painting over someone's creation is something only skilled painters can do, and apparently the real Clair is skilled enough to do so. So she found the painted Clair, found herself frustrated over her mother's portrayal of her, and proceeded to paint a new purpose over her, completely erasing who this painted Clair was. She was locked in the flying painting workshop, now a shell of herself, with her only duty to design and paint the Nevrons. Now, when it comes to these Nevrons, I don't think that they were created inherently for the purpose of serving as dangerous creatures that would attack anything. Rather, Clair's focus was their creation, not their purpose. Remember, chroma, the thing everything is made from, is not infinite, and whoever controls it can paint new things inside the canvas. With this act, the painted Clair was repurposed to be the one that chroma returns to if other beings were erased. This means that Aline would have no way to create anything new, and so Renoir could start the first of many gommages in the painted world, essentially switching the conflict between himself and Aline to a battle of attrition where her creations would be wiped out each year, with the oldest being the first ones to go. Aline must have realized what's going on. She was powerless to stop Renoir, and having no recourse to reply, reserved herself to doing the only thing she could. She painted a warning, a number on her monolith that indicated which of her creations she could maintain. Starting from 100, this number indicated the age of the creations that will be erased in the next year's gommage. Before leaving, the real Clair happened across Simon. Clair was able to use his love for her painted self, and bestowed great power upon him. He became so powerful that he was able to fell an Axon on his own. Given this feat, Clair thought of using him to Renoir's advantage, and directed him towards the monolith to expel Aline from the canvas. However, Simon could tell something was wrong. He was, after all, in love with the painted Clair, so he was aware that this Clair is different. He could not understand how this is possible, but he did figure out that she was trying to manipulate him. And so, once Simon made his way to the monolith, rather than expel the paintress, he listened to her and learned the truth, or at least what Aline wanted him to know. Knowing now the true threat to their existence, Simon ventured below where the real Renoir was sealed and attempted to expel him from the painting. We can actually see the aftermath of their fight in Renoir's drafts, a ruined place where we can find the remains of several Axons. In the end, we know that Simon was unsuccessful, but Claire made him too powerful for Renoir to simply kill, or even for him to pass away through natural means. So instead, he painted a prison for Simon deep beneath the canvas, and left nevrons of his own making to ensure no one would reach him and set him free. As far as we know, that's what Claire did in the canvas. I do think that she might have re-entered to check on the status of things. Verso himself confirms to have met her throughout the years, but she otherwise did not intervene in any other way. Either way, her actions show that she is not necessarily cruel, but rather indifferent to the things inside a canvas. She doesn't see them as real people and has no problem using them as she wishes. I also like the detail of encountering unpainted nevrons and how one of them tells you that they were tasked with destroying them because Claire is ashamed of their imperfections. It conveys that she's a perfectionist, which fits her character. Returning to Expedition Zero, we don't fully know what happened to them, or to the rest of the few search and rescue expeditions that follow, but there is, however, some information we could use to theorize. Renoir and Verso would join some of these expeditions, and one of them had a volunteer by the name of Julie. We know Verso fell in love with her, and we also know that he and Renoir would try to convince these expeditions to help the paintress, but they were secretive as to why. This naturally made the expeditioners weary and skeptical. Julie was too, and her suspicions were confirmed when she saw Verso hit by a mortal blow, only to be absolutely fine afterwards. Determined to learn the truth, Julie orders her colleagues to capture Verso and interrogate him, but Renoir is immediately hostile to anyone who might try to learn the truth, as he believed that it's better left a secret. So he proceeds to massacre Julie's expedition. In a journal left behind by Verso, he shifts between blaming Julie, but also understands why she grew suspicious. He recognizes the difficulty in telling her the truth, as the situation does sound absurd. I mean, how would you tell someone that their entire world is just a fabrication on a canvas? He's clearly left deeply distraught, but we also catch a glimpse of how his father has changed. It's implied that as time went on, the painted Renoir became paranoid of other people, thinking that they are the real Claire's creations. I believe this indicates a growing natural hostility towards expeditioners, a delusion born out of an intense need to hide the truth and preserve the canvas no matter the cost. He was, after all, specifically painted with that purpose in mind. This leads me to believe that Renoir is responsible for the untimely demise of the early search and rescue expeditions. If we look back at Verso's journal, he writes about this as if he expected this, as if he's done it before. This is the point I believe Verso turned on his father. Julie's death deeply affected Verso, and he started to feel hollow inside the canvas. He knew life was a lie meant to bring comfort, and he knew that he was going to live in this lie forever. I don't think we can fully grasp how broken such a reality can leave someone, how torturous life can feel in these circumstances. It makes sense that this determined Verso to seek release, but because he could not die, the only possible alternative was to expel Aline from the canvas and let the real Renoir erase everything. This, naturally, would not go well with the painted Renoir, so they clashed. In the end, however, both of them are immortal, neither could kill one another even if they wanted to, so they parted ways after scarring one another. Now, a quick side note about these scars. I absolutely love how if you were to zoom in Verso's face, you could tell that something is not normal about him, even before the Act 3 reveal. Like, the texture of his skin seems odd, as if he's a construct painted over, a detail that is also prominent on the right side of his face. It looks like smudged paint, a very cool piece of detail. After these events, life in Lumière would go on. Knowledge of old Lumière, the continent, the Gestrels, would all fade into myth, as the Gamages erased the oldest people of Lumière, taking their knowledge with them. The paintress and the number she paints on her monolith became a symbol of fear, a grim reminder that they are doomed as their life grows shorter and shorter. This is perhaps the biggest irony, how the paintress, in an act of affection, tried to warn her creations of the impending erasure, intending to let them know to make the most out of their time with their loved ones, and how her creations took it as a sign of malice, believing that the paintress paints death. In the years to come, Lumière would be host to new traditions, a celebration of life for those who would be erased in the next gommage. People would go on apprenticeships at exponentially younger ages due to their shortening lifespans, and most importantly, they would start going on expeditions again, several years after their last search and rescue efforts. These expeditions, however, would have a very different focus: to kill the paintress, unaware of the cruel reality of their existence. Nonetheless, the people of Lumière would find comfort in the idea that the sacrifices they make will help those who come after, thus shaping their culture in pushing onwards no matter the odds. Indeed, we can see this in the many journals expeditioners leave behind, as even in their final moments, many of them would find pride in paving the way for future expeditions. Now, we are not going to talk about each expedition in detail, as there are many, and it's not that relevant to our story. Most of them were unsuccessful. We can surmise that the painted Renoir would massacre many expeditioners to ensure they don't reach the monolith, while Verso would join some of them, sometimes with Monaco, sometimes with SKA, and sometimes with both. Either way, only Expedition 60 would reach the monolith and learn the truth, but unfortunately they wouldn't make it back in time to Lumière before their gommage to warn anyone. Also, it does kinda seem to be a joke? You mean to tell me that a naked and jacked group of expeditioners broke through the paintress's barrier through the sheer use of their massive muscles? God, I wish I could have seen that. Let's now do a bit of a time skip to Monolith Year 49. Back in the real world, Alicia woke up from another nightmare, traumatized by her brother's passing. Now a shadow of her former self, she's beckoned by Claire to Renoir's atelier, where she's told of the situation inside the canvas. Alicia desired to help her parents, so she found a place to hide the canvas away, hoping that once Aline is expelled, they would have enough time to destroy it before she'd find it again. Alicia then proceeded to enter the painting to help Renoir, but unfortunately, this does not go to plan. With Alicia being fairly inexperienced in using her abilities as a painter, she is overwhelmed by Aline's chroma and is reborn as Maëlle, forgetting her life outside the painting. Maëlle was born in Monolith Year 49. She was loved by her parents, but they were taken away by the gommage long before she'd be able to remember them. So Maëlle was passed from family to family, never feeling like she belonged until she came under the guardianship of Gustave and his sister. They would develop a very strong bond, and when the time came for Gustave to embark on his expedition, Maëlle volunteered to join. Even though she had several years before her gommage, she felt out of place in Lumière and sought the expedition as a way to experience something else. It's actually an interesting parallel with her life in the outside world. Now, we all know how Expedition 33 went. Arriving at the Dark Shores, most of the group was massacred by the painted Renoir and Claire's Nevrons, with the surviving members scattered. Maëlle wakes up in the family manor, and even though it's not specified how, I believe that the painted Renoir recognized her as the real Alicia and decided to seal her here with her father. Maëlle wouldn't recognize him since, of course, her memories were scrambled, and Renoir at that point had spent so much time in the painting that he was unrecognizable. She's eventually freed by Gustave and Lunet, who were directed there by a message left behind by Verso. Or at least I think it was Verso. It makes most sense. The painted Renoir wouldn't warn them because that would only strengthen the expedition, and Maëlle, being Alicia, could prove effective in expelling Aline from the painting. The curator wouldn't be able to leave a message as he's constrained to the manor until he's freed by the expedition, so that leaves Verso as the most likely possibility. And this does make a lot of sense. Verso was aware that Alicia entered the painting before the expedition departed, and even though she could not remember her real identity, Verso already had a few ideas about how he could use her to put an end to the painted world. Either way, Verso would not directly intervene until much later, watching over what's left of the expedition until the painted Renoir corners Gustave and Maëlle at Stonewave Cliffs. He purposefully lets Gustave die, the fucking bastard, and only interjects when Renoir is about to expel Maëlle from the canvas. He's naturally compelled to do so, as Alicia's presence opens up new possibilities. So he joins Expedition 33 in their aim to defeat the paintress, fully knowing what will happen if they do. Maëlle slowly starts to realize that something about her is different. She's the only one experiencing visions of the painted family, she's not affected by their time-freezing abilities, and is even talked to by them, being told to go home. She starts to be aware that something is wrong, but she will not understand what until it's too late. With Verso on their side, and joined by SK and Monaco, the expedition would advance further than many expeditions did, until, of course, the matter of breaking the monolith barrier came up.
We're heading for Old Lumière. Okay, bye.
This is when Verso suggests going through the ruins of Old Lumière, where he says that the heart of the paintress can be found. Now, there is no evidence that such a physical object truly exists. Instead, it's more evidence that Verso is not upfront with his colleagues, which again makes sense. Who knows how they would react to learning the truth? Yes, he is selfish in doing this, but at the same time, it is understandable. Existence at this point is torture to him. So, when he talks about breaking her heart, he means that figuratively. You see, Verso was banished from the manor after turning on his family, so its doors would never open to him. Instead, he figured that if he were to bring Alicia there, Aline would let him inside, at which point Verso would strike her down. It isn't about breaking her heart as much as it is a premature strike, and I mean very premature, but it perfectly exemplifies how desperate Verso is, that he'd use Mael as a trump card so early. But this also brings into question whether Aline was actually trapped in the monolith. In retrospect, I find it quite strange that she's here. I'm not completely certain, but I think this might have been a misconception. Unless Clair thought that the massive avatar, the monolith, is actually Aline. That one is indeed imprisoned there. It could be that she meant Aline simply took refuge there, as in she was cornered by Renoir and the Axons, and then didn't want to leave considering that old Lumière was shattered, her family was broken, and her creations were being erased. As in, she's too broken by grief and decided to remain in solitude. At any rate, Verso's plan failed, and his actions made the expedition grow even more suspicious of him. That, we can surmise at this point, is his modus operandi, lying by omission. You know, he's the sort of person that would tell you that his parents were painters, but he wouldn't tell you that his parents are the painters. Either way, the team would keep him on, as their interests are aligned, though not for the same reasons. From here, they best the Axons, open a path to the monolith, vanquish the painted Renoir, and successfully expel Aline from the painting. I actually really liked this small sequence when Aline, defeated, gives up and starts healing the expedition. It's something that comes out of nowhere, but makes perfect sense if you know the truth. They are her creations, they're her painted son's friends, and even her own real son's creations and companions. It's as if she's using what little power she has left to protect them from the impending gommage. It's hard for her in this moment of weakness to not do so. She's sad. This might just be the last time she sees a reflection of her son. She desperately and in vain tries not to let them go. This is the point where we should realize that something is terribly wrong, but we are left with no choice other than to strike her down. Expedition 33 was a success, and so they returned to Lumière to share their victory with everyone. The people of Lumière rejoice, as finally the paintress is no more, and the gommages would finally cease. Or so they thought. While everyone celebrated, Verso was waiting, because he knew their actions doomed the canvas and everyone in it. With all of Aline's creations now erased, the chroma that painted over Alicia, making her Mael, also dissipated, allowing her to regain her memories. In the desolate scape of Lumière, she joins Verso as they get ready to talk to the real Renoir, who is revealed to have been the curator all along. Alicia proposes that now, since Aline was expelled from the canvas, and the canvas itself was hidden, they repaint everything back to normal. After all, she's lived here for about 16 years, she cares about this world and the people inside it. Renoir, to his horror, recognized this for what it was. His daughter was now falling into the same intoxicating grasp of the canvas that took his wife, so he refused and proceeded to attempt destroying the canvas. However, due to the toll of erasing everyone, his prolonged exposure to the canvas, or another painter being present, he was unable to do so. So Alicia and Verso escaped with SKA's help, and then proceeded to paint her allies back into existence, as well as some expeditioners to help them against Renoir. Now, gameplay-wise, from here you could just return to Lumière and fight Renoir immediately, but in my headcanon, I like to think that they didn't. I like to think that they explored the worlds the real Verso painted long ago, that they managed to have fun, like when they painted the message to Renoir.
You're a paintress? Paint something.
How about, Papa, you go home?
Oh, look at that! They actually wrote that. Oh, you beautiful game. I like to think that they found Simon and liberated him from his tortured existence, that they found the painted Claire and through their fight managed to give her a brief moment of clarity where she could make her own choice and free herself from the shackles the real Claire painted over her. Their adventures might have been many, but in the end, there's only one way to end this. And so, Expedition 33 returns to Lumière to expel Renoir. Renoir tries one more time to persuade Alicia to leave. He at no point undermines what this canvas means to her, how she feels about returning to the real world, or even how it's the last piece that connects her to her dead brother. I cannot emphasize enough how he is not a cruel man. He understands, but he knows that if Alicia were allowed to stay, she would stay with no regard to her physical body and eventually die. He will not let that happen, even if his daughter would end up hating him for it, ironically showing that Aline's painted facsimile of him is actually quite accurate. What follows is a battle of epic proportions. The Axons make a reappearance, Aline comes to Alicia's aid, and I'm just able to one-shot Renoir because I'm insanely overleveled. Also, bear in mind that time flows differently in reality and in the canvas, meaning that Alicia's hiding spot for the canvas was so shit that Aline was able to find it pretty much immediately. At any rate, Renoir, unable to defeat Alicia and her friends, tried one more time to convince her to leave. He opened a rift in reality, showing the effect this prolonged exposure had on her mother, but Alicia would not be persuaded. She promised she would return, but Renoir knew the grip of the canvas held her too tightly. She will stay here, and she will die. Knowing this painful reality, he held her tightly one last time, feigning trust in her promise, as he fully expected this to be the last time he'd see his daughter.
Hold on to each other.
Meanwhile, the tear through reality persisted, and Verso entered it. He found himself in a pocket dimension deep within the canvas, where the fragment of the original Verso's soul was maintaining the painting. Alicia shortly follows, and realizes what he's about to do. Verso never gave up on his intention of erasing himself, and he will erase the entire canvas if it's what it took to end his existence. Here's where the game gives us a final choice to decide the fate of the canvas. If Alicia succeeds, Verso begs in his final moments not to be repainted, for he never wanted this life, a request that she would not be able to keep. In the last cutscene, the people of Lumière gather at the opera house, with Alicia holding the hand of one of Gustave's apprentices. She repainted everyone, Ciel's husband Pierre, Gustave and Sophie, and even her brother. I think one of the greatest things about this cutscene is how unsettling everything becomes once it switches to this monochromatic filter. Alicia got what she wanted, but it comes at a cost, and she will die in the canvas. If you choose Verso, he comforts Alicia before she disappears from the canvas, telling her that everything will be okay, confident that she'll outgrow her grief. He then proceeds to disrupt Verso's soul, starting the process of erasing the canvas, and spends the last few precious moments with his friends as the world fades into nothing. In the outside world, the Descendre family comes together to mourn Verso, with Aline and Renoir comforting each other, Claire taking some time off of her conflict with the writers, and Alicia smiling as she imagines her friends for one final time. The cycle of grief is finally coming to an end. And that's the end of the story. I definitely think that the question of which ending is good is highly debatable. Yes, it is implied that in Alicia's ending she does pass away, but at the same time, this is what she wanted. She's not at peace in the outside world, and taking this painted fantasy away does feel like robbing the agency of a girl who has already been through a lot. At the same time, it's hard to argue with the idea that sometimes you need someone's push to help you heal from your grief and move on with your life, even when you don't want to. Life goes on, and so should you. But is it entirely right to want to erase the entire world? When you look at the people in the canvas, they have sentience, they can feel. In fact, an entire theme the game focuses on is whether our artistic creations have a soul. Is it inherently right to erase them just because one person wishes to cease existing? I mean, it's already unfair how much they had to suffer because of some family drama between gods, essentially. I think neither choices are inherently good, but that's what makes the endings feel so harrowing and empty, but in a way that is narratively immensely engaging and compelling. And that's all I have to say for this video. Naturally, there are things that I've glossed over for the sake of being succinct, or I may have even misunderstood things. This is actually the first video of this type that I've made, and I did it purely because I really love this game. Like, for a long time, I thought I was burnt out by gaming because nothing was really impressing me anymore. But this game, with its excellent writing, acting, characters, gameplay, it showed me that it's not me that is the issue, it's the games I've played. I felt very happy playing Expedition 33, and it's been a long time since I felt so empty after platinuming a game. Truly an amazing experience made by a fantastic team. Except for those fucking Giselle games. So anyway, thank you for watching, do like and subscribe because I'm still under the illusion that this helps somewhere in the algorithm, and of course, have a good one.